So, the focus of the presentation, Overruling Safer Sex in the HIV era, focuses primarily on the Roman Catholic narrative of procreative sex, in particular how this... Sorry? Hello?
Is the microphone working?
Is it working?
Not very well. Maybe hold it closer to your mouth. That's definitely on.
Hello? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying that the focus of this presentation is primarily how the Roman Catholic narrative of procreative sex hinders HIV prevention, and specifically condom use amongst Italian MSM. So the finding of this research are part of a wider research which was part of my PhD research, and the objective of this research was a critical evaluation of the biomedical and sociological approaches in terms of HIV prevention. I would like to say that my perspective, I'm a sociologist. So then an in-depth analysis of gay male representation in media production, and I was very interested in the traffic between representation of HIV and HIV campaigns and texts. And also the third part, an in-depth analysis of sexual behavior among Italian MSM living in the Veneto region, and I will show you an image or map in a second. The wider research question was, what are the social cultural factors that influence sexual behavior, and more specifically safer sex? And the research methodology was drawing on the rationale of grounded theory, and in particular I was also drawing on discourse analysis and the notion of hegemony. Okay, so here we got a map of Veneto region, which is the area where I was conducting the interview. Is in the northeast of Italy, and it was divided into two phases. The first phase was called Cielon, and it was part of a wider Southern Eastern European project of HIV prevention. And the second part of the qualitative was carried out in Padua, which is the neighboring province. I interviewed 40 MSM, and for continuity of this project Cielon, I had to use the acronym MSN, but actually in Italy at this moment in time there's very little understanding of what MSM is. It's much more about gay identity. So the main themes of this research are HIV fear, condom anxiety, and HIV denial, and the data were analyzed following the factor of age, serological status, and relationship. And in a minute I will identify the discourse on religion and how in this condom use came specifically on the idea of condom anxiety and HIV denial. So condom anxiety, I disaggregate specifically in the age group between 31 and 35 and 36 and 40. In this age group, the assumption of being healthy twists the semantic of condom use. And I will give you an example. So I will give you a minute to read this quote. And basically, there is the assumption if someone asks me to use condom, there must be something wrong with them. So looking deep down, where this comes from? The perspective changes the perception of condoms from an HIV prevention technology to indicators that someone may be diseased. It also highlights that there is no process of condom acculturation, and it's here where we start talking about religion. So the first, talking about condom acculturation, this is a campaign that was from a local LGBT organization, and basically I translated, you see on the bottom left hand side here is in Italian, translated here for you, and basically I was interested on the traffic between the image and the text, and how piaceri quotidiani, daily pleasures, try to acculturate young men or the entire gay community, if we can talk about gay community in Italy, about using condom, literally ducking a biscuit in a shot of espresso, so the use of condom should become as easy as drinking a shot of espresso as do Italian do, and probably also here. So there is an hegemonic narrative. I'm using the terms back to the idea of Gramsci. And why did I use these specific images? Because there is an intertwining in the discourse in Italy between the Roman Catholic Church and the Italian Republic. And the specific choice of these images, the crucifix and the image of the President of the Republic, but which has changed now, is Renzi, we found these images in most public buildings, school included. So people like me, I'm Italian, and most people still now, when they go to school, in front of the teacher, opposite the teacher, in a big wall, there is an image of Christ and an image of the Prime Minister, sorry, the President of the Republic. So, going back to the Roman Catholic Church, we look what they think about gay identity. And here I got a quote from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And here he says, basing itself on the sacred scripture, which represent homosexual acts as acts of great depravity, tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They close sexual acts to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. Personally, I find it difficult to read these words, and I just want to focus for timing reason on what I underline. They close sexual acts to the gift of life, and that's where here this quote go hands in hand with the politic of the Italian state. Because in the Article 29 we got this law that is implemented. The Republic recognized the rights of the family as natural society founded on marriage. So if you look back at the idea that the Roman Catholic Church only recognized procreative sex and the state recognized only the family founded on marriage, there is no place for same-sex identity. I should remind you that in Italy there is no marriage, gay marriage is not allowed. So to carry on this, there is also a strong hegemonic discourse against condom. The word condom is forbidden. For instance, on World AIDS Day in 2011, the word prophylactico condom is forbidden in the Italian state channel RAI. And this is not a representation of their backing, but actually what happened in one of on the website. They use this form of sarcasm to say that we are not even allowed to use the word condoms. Equally, another example on that the Italian broadcasting channel RAI censor view condom at the Concerto per il Lavoro, which happens every year on the 1st of May, when the singer Luca Romagnoli exposed a condom. There was an advertisement break. So, going back to my interview, going back to the theme of HIV denial, which was one of the main themes that I highlighted, we got this quote that wrap it up the hegemonic discourse between the church and the Italian state. Often, gay sex is a random encounter with a man and perceived with a sense of guilt because it's not a part of what we have learned from our families and from the Roman Catholic Church. Gay men are caught between a sense of guilt and the idea that AIDS is a consequence of their sexuality. When you live sex in this way, almost secretly, it is difficult to implement safer sex. It is obvious that you pretend that AIDS is far away from you. You won't be able to cope with guilt and HIV fear otherwise. So here we see exactly where the two go hand in hand, their notion of family and the Roman Catholic Church. So, in conclusion, the Roman Catholic Church, endorsed by the Italian state, generates an hegemonic narrative of procreative sex, endorsed by the notion of the family and the state. And although these findings are not conclusive, they are indicative that the procreative narrative of safer sex, narrative of sex hinders safer sex among Italian MSM living in the Veneto region. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mauro, or comments, indeed? Thank you, Hector. No takers? One at the back.
Let's hope it works now. Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's really, really interesting presentation. I was just struck by the very first extract that you presented, which seemed to suggest that if somebody suggests using a condom, that there's a suspicion that that person may have HIV. How pervasive was that sort of perception in your sample? Would you say most of the MSM whom you interviewed held that sort of perception? Because it's quite different, I think, from what we might observe perhaps in this country, where there's perhaps a little bit of stigma appended to condomless sex.
No, thank you for the question. I think that it came across to a sample of people living between their 30s and 40s, and it's quite strong because another thing that came up from the finding of this research, that there is silence on HIV. The public health, that HIV prevention campaign goes back to a few years ago, and since then there hasn't been done much HIV prevention, let alone that was from a gay charity, was not done from the Italian state. So if we put the two together, the fact that there is silence on HIV, which in Foucauldian terms silence speaks for itself, and little HIV prevention, and the state itself doesn't allow the word prophylactic or condom, that speaks volumes. So the idea that is, I would say that most of 50% of people would enact that kind of idea. It goes back also to the idea of HIV fear, because they find it difficult to negotiate safer sex, because when condom comes in the conversation, people get scared. So there is HIV denial too.
Thank you.
Did you find this surprising? Because I mean, to me, this sounds like 1951 in any other country. Did you have a hypothesis that this was what you were going to find? And also, did you, pardon my geographical ignorance, it's matched only by my other ignorances, but were you talking about rural or urban? I mean, is this a fairly cosmopolitan area, or like gay bars, like gay magazines? Was there any sort of information out there, any sort of intervention stuff?
Yeah.
And
so.
if so, is community-based education also censored? I mean, people, you get a bunch of gay people together, want to get the message out, they're going to get the message out one way or another, even if it's just mimeographing stuff in their basement. So, I mean, are we talking about rural? What sort of... even when you've got a hegemonic discourse, there's got to be an alternative message out there somewhere, right? I mean, Foucault, resistance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this sounds very, homogenous in terms of, with it's sort of homogenous, isolated, very outdated. There has to have been some other discourse, some other communication going on somewhere along the line. Could you tell me about that a bit?
I can see when I was doing the presentation that you were rather shocked, quite rightly. The answer in terms of geography, they were both main gay hubs, but they include both the center of Verona and Padua have a gay scene, but also there were people from the countryside. So we are talking about the northeast of Italy, which there is a strong Catholic presence, but they got gay pride and so forth. So there is visibility. I didn't have any hypothesis because I tried to use, I use grounded theory, and I was interested in discourse analysis, so combining the two. I am a cultural insider. I'm an Italian gay man living in England, so when I came to these kind of findings, I was not surprised at all. And this goes back to what I said a bit earlier, that there is silence on HIV, and also when on the the kind of global idea of HIV comes up on the 1st of December, when on the news people, there is broadcast news on HIV, and still in that time there is no mention of condoms. So if we add up, my answer is that I was not surprised at all. It seemed a very backward, yes, I agree, but that's the reality. That's why I decided to do this presentation based on religion.
There's no counter discourse.
There is a counter discourse. I'll give you an example. I didn't talk because it's another section of the research, but the main gay magazine called Babylonia discontinues in 2007, and there is just one magazine that is based in Milan, which is another big gay hub. Is very commercial. So in the conclusion, one of the conclusions of my PhD is that the counter-hegemonic discourse in Italy is very fragmented, very regional. And I'll give you another example. The ASSHH UK, which is the main gay association in Italy, the national one, never sponsored on a gay magazine an HIV prevention of their own.
It's an interesting question, though, isn't it, in terms of how you move from kind of meta-narratives or discourses such as those produced by religious agencies and or state agencies, and the lived experiences which people account at the level or within their interview, in terms of how you and whether you can see engagement between the two before you make quite large leaps in terms of your conclusion. So it's a similar question in terms of intriguing. The interviewees aren't perhaps referring to other sources, resources or forms.
I'm completely shocked that
No, I can understand.
people are creative. People find a way around things. Let me give you an example, okay? Jews are not allowed to travel on the Sabbath unless they're traveling over water. If they're on the Titanic, right, they're not going to kill themselves. They were on a ship. So Orthodox Jews, you know what they used to do? They would take a hot water bottle on a bus and sit on it, and that way they were traveling over water, right?
Yeah.
Okay, haha. You find a way around things. Genius, isn't it? Find a way around things. The fact that these guys are not, it's beautiful. It's true. I'm not making this up. People find their way around things. The Pope says don't wear a condom. There's got to be, is there no loopholes that anyone's finding anywhere?
In respect of condom use, you mean, or?
I think I share the surprise to a degree also because of the great success of the reproductive health policies of the Italian population. I mean, they managed to somewhat use a whole set of available reproductive interventions to have planned reproductive outcomes, and all that also happens within the same kind of church and state discourse. So I just wondered whether there's something similarly happening, but which is not picked here. Because also the second part of this, we've seen, of course we are seeing this from a distance, massive demonstrations in terms of same-sex marriage in Italy.
Yeah.
So in a context which is that is happening, it's sort of slightly surprising conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the limits of this research is that it didn't take into account social media. And when I started, social media there was no Facebook in Italy in those days. But I understand the idea of shock, because in a time, especially in the Anglo-American, Australian context where we're talking about PrEP, in Italy, we are kind of stuck in that idea that, I mean, another thing that one of my questions were about if people knew about PEP, and there was not really lot of knowledge on PEP, and also when people will go for an HIV test, sometimes they wouldn't even go back to collect the results. So there is one of the things that isolated was HIV fear. People are totally scared of HIV at the extent they don't want to talk, and then condoms become the element of HIV. That's why in a way condom becomes an example that someone must be diseased, because otherwise you wouldn't ask for it. I should remind you that Italy is the country where, when we had the first prevention campaign from the state use a lot the idea of abstinence. And the Prime Minister, the Health Minister in those days, Pierre Catten, sent out a letter encouraging Italian family or Italian young people to get married and not to practice sex, because it's something that you do when you're married and is procreative. And part of my research was part of looking at what we call in Italian the collective thinking, the immaginario collettivo. So I was, as I said earlier, I was interested of what is there, what Italian breathe in terms of HIV, what they know, and how that is later translated in their sexual behavior.